It's been wonderful. Oh, thank you. Just wanted to thank everybody for coming. I would now like to present our chairman of MIAS, Sylvia Marchili with White and Case, who will start the program for us.
Thank you, Ines. I'm the chair, but Ines is the CEO. So we all do whatever she says. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. It's a great turnout for a great topic and great panelists. So we're very excited to, as I say, having all of you here, although, Francisco is really the host here. But if you're not familiar with MIAS, the Miami International Arbitration Society, we are, as you can imagine, very much focused on promoting Miami as a hub for international arbitration, both in the sense of, practitioners from other jurisdictions coming for hearings here, to using Miami as a seat, and also developing our own footprint here, which we have done collectively very successfully in the last few years. And I can say that as a newcomer, unlike others like Don, who've been here in Miami for longer. And the topic for today is private equity, hedge funds, and international arbitration. And I'll say maybe a couple of words before I pass on the mic to you, Don. But as I think we have all experienced in the last, I would say, decade, while before we used to have the more traditional clients in disputes, the major energy companies or the traditional corporates, more and more, not just in the US, but also throughout Latin America, the client configuration has changed. And I think that it is more the case that we deal with private equity and hedge funds as clients, which I have to admit are my favorite type of clients because they're very sophisticated, very efficient, and executive. And that's a pleasure to deal with, and like others who should remain nameless. For today, before we start with the program, we'll have Don, who is a named partner at his firm, Mark McDonald Hayden, say a few words about one of our marquee events here in Miami, to which people really from all over the world come. Us at MIAS really are at the forefront of that thought leadership aspect of our mission. So Don.
Thanks, Sylvia. I'm here to talk about Miami Arbitration Week 2024, as well as the Investor State Conference, our third conference. It's our flagship event, I would say. It's in its third year. It brings practitioners and panelists that are involved in the investor state space here to University of Miami, a great venue. And this year we're doing it on a little later. We're doing it December 1st. And let's see, on your shares, there should be a colorful list of all the events that are going on in Miami Arbitration Week, including the December 1st Investor State Conference, which you will soon hear about our keynote speakers that will be announced shortly. We're keeping it a surprise for a bit. And we also you're able to buy tickets. I would encourage us to folks to consider doing a sponsorship. We already have some wonderful sponsors, of course, at the top. Again, this year is King & Spalding, thanks to Harry Burnett. And then we also have, this is the list of the various events for the Miami Arbitration Week. Because we're doing it, and it is around the ICC, as it has been in the past, but because we're doing it in December, and because we're moving into Art Basel, we thought it was a great opportunity to have one of our programs involving art arbitration. Because of moving its headquarters here to Coral Gables, we thought it would also be great to have one of our events be on sports arbitration. So we've got some really interesting panelists for both of those events. There is a cocktail receptions. There's also the LCIA is having an event, a Tinley Hall style event. And I believe the Jams is doing something. We always have the traditional FIU hangover event the morning after the end of the ICC conference. So we've got a lot of things going on. Young MIAS is doing an event as well. So there's a lot going on. We're very excited. It was very well attended last year, and we're just hopeful that we will have a lot of participation this year. Here's the silver sponsors to date: Hogan Lovells, Hollander Knight, and Jones Day. The bronze sponsors are here as well. And I would ask that you consider a sponsorship, because this is our one sort of fundraising event of the year. So we're able, because of these sponsorships and because of people participating in these activities, we're able to put on events like this throughout the year. So thank you so much. Thanks, Sylvia.
Of course, thank you, Don. And thank you for all you do for these events and also in general at MIAS. And in exchange of the sponsorship and supporting the good cause, what those events give you really is visibility to thought leaders, not just again in Miami, but also throughout Latin America, in the US, and even in Europe, who come that week. So you get to see how, you know, arbitrators think about certain topics that are key to some of the disputes that you may be handling, apart from networking with great colleagues like ourselves. So with that, Francisco, I have the mission of introducing you, but I'm also a fan of just saying a few words and let, you know, the substance begin. But Francisco, who I think you all know, is a partner here at Reed Smith, Global Disputes Practice. He's also the managing partner of this office. So if you have any complaints, you can also direct it. And most importantly, well, no, he's also a professor at FIU. And I was going to say, most importantly, he is a key player at MIAS, at our board, and has been putting a lot of energy and partnering with us in so many initiatives that we're very thankful to have you at the board, and of course, organizing these events. So without further ado, Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia, for your leadership and continued support for events like this. And welcome everyone to Reed Smith. For us, it's quite an honor to host this event. Without a doubt, and I think we all can testify and confirm that Miami has become a hub for international arbitration. That's no news, right? We all know it. We know it because of the number of arbitrations that are seated here in Miami. We know it because of the strong teams of practitioners that we see in the different firms that call Miami home. And of course, we know it because of the strength of our universities, FIU, having strong focuses on and programs on international arbitration. And that progress, that growth is not accidental. It is because of the work of organizations like the Miami International Arbitration Society and a group of practitioners who have committed to promoting Miami as a hub for international arbitration. And it is happening before our eyes. What's really interesting, that at the same time that Miami is cementing its role as a hub for international arbitration, Miami is realizing its dream of becoming a true international financial capital. For a long, long time, we've talked about how Miami is the gateway to Latin America. For a long, long time, we've talked about how Miami really is in the middle of both worlds. But now we're seeing it as well, how financial groups come to Miami, whether it is private equity, hedge funds, and move their headquarters to Miami and contribute to really what's making a very vibrant environment for business and for the law. And that's why we're so happy to see this audience, which obviously happy to welcome our MIAS colleagues, but also very happy to see a number of private equity hedge funds executives. And the diversity of our audience is reflected on our panel so that we can have a true discussion, a true intersection between the two worlds that have been growing almost on parallel tracks. To my right, you will see that you have some of the key business leaders that are working in the forefront, and they're going to give us their perspective from a business, private equity view of the world and how they see international arbitration. We all sing our praises. We all love international arbitration. Well, how do they see that world? What's happening in that world? Is that matched by reality? The growth that we hear about matched by reality? Each one of them will introduce themselves shortly, but to my further right, you have Mitch Ackles. He's the president of the Hedge Fund Association. Then to his left, you have Valerio Forte. He's a partner at Profundas Capital and also with the Association for Corporate Growth in Miami. And we have Gabe Roos, CEO of Arthica Capital and one of the leaders in the private equity sector here in Miami as well. And to my left, you're going to see, of course, the legal perspective. And you're going to have Rodrigo Tanuri, who's coming all the way from Brazil, working a lot of international arbitration matters dealing with private equity. And my partner, Joe Tuso, who travels both worlds. Joe was an in-house with a private equity group and now has come back to Reed Smith, focusing on disputes arising out of private equity and hedge fund investments. And as you can see, with these different perspectives, what we want to have is a real discussion of the issues that are impacting our various sectors. And hopefully we'll have time for some of your questions. The idea is to have a true conversation about these issues and to get the discussion started. And hopefully this will be the first of many hybrid events in which we join forces with other organizations that are promoting Miami as well from their business perspective. And Mitch, I want to start with you. First, tell us a little bit about the Hedge Fund Association before we delve into this issue and what you do in your business.
I'm happy to. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak. So the Hedge Fund Association is a global nonprofit industry association headquartered in New York. I get to live in Miami. I'm not complaining about that. The organization also is a nonpartisan lobbying organization. I'm a registered lobbyist. I've worked with Capitol Hill, everything from Dodd-Frank to the Jobs Act to the accredited investor threshold. We have won everything that we've done. We have a 100% track record of succeeding. I had plenty of lunches with Barney Frank and some others back when I had hair that led to that. But I'll tell you, the organization has chapters in 16 countries. We are completely volunteer driven. I get to be president, but some of my fellow leaders are in the crowd, like Nick Tootle. And the organization's mission is very similar to any industry organization. It's get people together to learn and do business. Pretty simple. And we've been quite successful at doing that for 27 years.
Now, Mitch, from your perspective, what do you see on the grounds? Is it true that Miami is becoming a hub for private equity and hedge funds group?
So the answer is resoundingly yes. And I can say this with certainty. I'm a native. I was born here, South Miami Hospital, grew up on Old Cutler Road. I've seen this city, lived through every hurricane since then, and this town is booming. The pandemic only provided a catalyst for that to even accelerate further. So I do think Miami, South Florida, and the entire coast, all the way up to Palm Beach, is thriving. And it isn't just the emerging managers. You know, I've collaborated over many years as someone that, you know, worked around the world on behalf of the alternative investment industry with government agencies based in Miami, the Miami Downtown Development Authority, the Miami-Dade Beacon Council. And I used to get on Zoom calls or do meetings with them to attract managers to come and relocate here. That accelerated during the pandemic to where every day was a Zoom call with Balyasny and Point 72 and everybody you can imagine wanting to know not only where their office should be, what private schools their kids should go to, what neighborhood they should live in. So I think Miami is thriving as it relates to the alternative investment industry, not just hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, and everybody that invests in them. We also have always had a very strong community, quite secretive, of family offices that are here. So it's not a bad, not a plan.
And now, Valerio, let me ask you to introduce yourself quickly so that we know your perspective.
Sure, I'm going to do it very quickly. All of my history is on LinkedIn. But to divide it into first half of my career, I was a banker. Worked for institutions that became UBS over time, and worked for UBS in New York, Zurich, Basel, and London, primarily on the capital raising side and leverage finance and acquisition finance. Then I moved back to the United States in 2020, and after a brief stint in consulting, I joined HIG Capital, where I was head of business development for the last, well, for 15 years. And I left there at the beginning of last year to join a startup with a human capital and talent management consultancy, as well as start Profundus, which is a private equity investor. We incorporated earlier this year, and we've closed a few transactions. I'm also on the Association for Corporate Growth, but not on the national level, just on the South Florida chapter. I'm on the board and incoming vice president for next year. Association for Corporate Growth does everything that he does, just for private equity and the ecosystem around private equity. So unlike, I don't want to speak for hedge funds, but private equity world involves not just investors, but lots of consultants, accountants, lawyers, lots of people who are going to help me right-size my business and implement the cloud, et cetera. So there's a whole community, and that's what ACG really focuses on. We're the chapter's headquartered out of Broward, but we have a Miami network as well as a Palm Beach network. So that's me in a background. What was the question?
I'm glad that that was a very brief answer, but we will make sure to join LinkedIn and look at your entire profile.
Can't miss me. Can't miss me.
Valerio, in terms of what's happening here in Miami, Mitch was talking about the growth that he's seeing. Are you seeing that on the private equity side as well?
The short answer is yes. There are a lot of people who are setting things up in Miami, but there are also a lot of private equity funds where people have just gone rogue and said, I'm moving to Florida, that's it. I'm moving to Palm Beach, or I'm moving to Hope Sound, or I'm moving to Fort Lauderdale or Miami. And they are let's call it the representative. But again, as I said, private equity doesn't exist in a vacuum. You've got to have investment bankers. And so you have the same thing. You have offices. I remember I was at 1450 Brickell for a long time. There was a corner office on our floor, dark. It was Houlihan Lokey, and they had a little office there, and one person used to walk in once in a while, and she just did real estate. Now they've got an office somewhere else on Brickell, and there are more people. So it's not necessarily that the whole firm is moving here, but you're getting representation here. Wherever you have companies, especially with private equity, people leave. I'm one of them, and they start their own firms. Perhaps you did the same thing. It's just part of the way it goes. You join a group of 10 people and you're all doing something, then suddenly it's 150 people, and you say, I don't want to work in that environment anymore. I want to go back to 10 people, or I want to go back to, so you've got a lot of these things developing. At HIG, I think we're the second oldest continuous PE fund here, Trivest being the oldest from 83, and then HIG from 93, and then there's several that were founded in the 90s. But now you are seeing a lot more firms, both funded private equity investors and unfunded private equity investors.
Now, Gabe, you're also in LinkedIn, so we can check your page, but can you tell us briefly a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm actually not a Miami native. I was born in Las Vegas. I'm one of the few that's actually conceived and born in Vegas. Been in Miami for 30 years. I was in Silicon Valley during the dot-com era, involved in many startups, raising many capital, very well versed in the private equity space, what it was back then and what it is today. I founded a company called MIAS Corporation. We were an international logistics software corporation solution, and had an exit in 2019 in private equity, partial. And after a series of about half a dozen roll-ups and acquisitions, then a complete exit in 2022. After a short stint in retirement, I started Arthica Capital. I'm currently the CEO of Arthica Capital. Arthica Capital manages financial vehicles offering alternative investments for qualified investors, primarily in life insurance settlements. Life insurance settlements, an elite, non-correlated asset, which offers secure and high yield returns to our investors.
Now, what are you seeing happening in Miami from your perspective?
I think it's right what this gentleman was saying, Valerio, right? What Valerio was saying is you have a lot of talent here. So a lot of, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Scott Adams tried to coin the term Silicon Coast, right? He had the first big exit in South Florida. It's a very well-known exit. And he started an incubator in South Florida called Silicon Coast. It didn't quite take off, but I think we are seeing it. It's converting into the Silicon Coast. It's no longer the era where if you have a capital firm that you have to have an address on Wall Street, or if you're a tech company, you need to be in Silicon Valley. It doesn't matter where you are now. You know, people respect it. If you're in Palm Beach, if you're in Brickell, actually Brickell's very prestigious now. You know, people, I want an address on Brickell, right? It's just that stigma. But there's a lot of talent here. So private equity is noticing that a lot of this talent leaves these companies and starts these companies. It's growing, it's emerging. It's fascinating. Every day I get a deck from a different company in South Florida, a new pitch deck in a new space, from a couple guys who left the company, and all of a sudden they've got a $15 million, you know, ARR business, and they're looking to raise capital. So it's definitely, Miami's definitely, everyone wants to be here. You know, it's the playground for America, I think, right now.
Now, before we turn to the legal side, I want to drill down a little bit in terms of what we're seeing, the type of investments. What type of assets are these companies managing and investing in? And are these assets Miami-based, or these assets are in other parts of the world and are being managed from the Miami area? I mean, what's your perspective? And this is a question for anyone that wants to take it.
And you can look at our company's example. Magaya was based in Miami. We had offices in South America and across the US, but our focus was Miami. So we thought that was a challenge when we started our roadshow. But we went to Silicon Valley and we, you know, interviewed half a dozen investment bankers, and we chose to pick one from that area. But I don't think it was a handicap for us being in South Florida. It's just where we grew up, you know. And I think for us the advantage was our client base. You know, you could throw a rock from our building and hit, you know, 3 of our customers. You know, 80% of the companies in Miami used our software. So for us, it was critical to be here. Right?
So for you, Gabe, not only you're based in Miami, but you're also investing in assets that are here in Miami,
Correct.
in addition to assets outside of Miami.
Correct.
Okay. Valerio, Mitch, what's your perspective?
Well, I mean, you know, capital knows no border. We'll invest, we would invest anywhere, and we have investments in Germany, and the US, but we're also looking in Mexico as well. But, sure, we'd love to buy more things in Florida because they're close. They're easier to manage, easier to go see. And in fact, we are hoping to close one, before the year end in Florida. But it's never going to be my number one filter. It'll be something I'm conscious of. I would love to invest in Florida. Look, any company that is attractive, I'd rather buy it. Again, proximity, and, you know, I won't deny a certain level of pride. I haven't been here as long as you, but, you know, I've been here a large portion of my life, and Florida's been good to me, so I'm happy to invest in it, but it can't be,
And I guess what I take from you is that very similar to what's happening in international arbitration, we see a lot of arbitrations that are seated here in Miami, but really have nothing to do with the assets or disputes that are Miami centric. It's just that the talent is here, that the clients feel comfortable coming here in this jurisdiction. And I get a sense that private equity hedge funds are feeling comfortable being here in Miami, and from Miami managing not only the local assets, but also the assets that are beyond the borders of the state. Mitch, is that what you're seeing as well?
I think the headline in the Wall Street Journal is Wall Street South. That's what we are. We've got to accept that. I think it's been a long time coming. I think I couldn't agree more with my fellow panelists. It isn't Steve Cohen living in Coral Gables, but there's a satellite. And it isn't, you know, all of these other firms, the Citadels or the Bridgewaters or the others. But I will tell you, based on the calls that I've had over the last 10 years, they are bringing teams down here. They are recognizing that this is an attractive place to build, you know, smart, effective teams that can manage their firms. And, you know, the Hedge Fund Association, the name on the door is HFA because it's trademarked around the world. But we have a private equity committee, we have a venture capital committee, we have a digital assets committee. Half of our members are allocators. So we're trying to serve the whole umbrella of the ecosystem. But I'll tell you, there's plenty of room for everyone. And to answer your question, I don't think the people that I've seen relocate, let's say in the last 10 years, are necessarily aiming at Miami as where they would make investments or, you know, or do anything. I think it's just a great place to live. And it's a great place to live and to work and look outside. I mean, this is hard to beat. We're under a tropical storm watch right now.
Well, I had to fly down my daughter from Tallahassee last night. So yes, I do know about that.
I mean, this isn't bad.
And Gabe, you were mentioning the tax environment as being very attractive as well.
Yeah, you know, there's this guy that moved to Miami. I forget his name, Jeff Bezos, I think his name is.
No.
You know,
Are you related?
no, I mean, people say he looks like me, but But yeah, I mean, there's the proof right there, right? He's making this, his playing ground right now, stomping grounds.
And putting aside the geographical locations for the assets, what type of assets are you seeing that this private equity hedge funds are investing in? I mean, are we talking about real estate, infrastructure, technology? Is there a common denominator that you're seeing more than other?
I don't think there is. I think I don't think there's one, I think every different private equity has their model, right? And what they're looking to execute. So if they're in the software space, they're looking at software down here. If they're in the real estate space, then they're looking at real estate space. But I don't think it's a one size fits all approach.
Valerio, where you?
Absolutely not. I mean, you're looking at anything. I think your business with the whole life settlements is somewhat more unique. Those financial services, you don't see that as much, but in general, I mean, it's anything. But if you're in Florida and you're looking in Florida, you're going to see more healthcare, more financial services, more tech, more hospitality. Those would be your big, I'm probably missing. some business
No, you
services,
hit it
but
spot
those are
on,
kind of
yeah.
the big ones that
Five
you're gonna
people.
see. Yeah, that you're gonna see, exactly.
Yeah, I just looked at a mental health platform, a deck last week, and I was surprised. Yeah, they're here in South Florida.
I mean, I'm looking at seafood distribution
Yeah.
right now in Florida, and that's big here. It is.
Sure, proximity to the port.
I'm allergic.
I'm a vegan. No,
Before I get too comfortable in the transactional world, I gotta be reminded that I am an arbitrator and litigator, right? And move to the other side of the coin. And Joe, why don't you introduce yourself very briefly? I know you're LinkedIn as well, so.
Thank you. It's probably not as robust. I try to keep most things off the internet. I'm Joe Tuso. I'm a partner here. I started as a summer associate through partner. I left and I joined a small post 0809 crisis fund, which grew. I helped them grow to a couple $2 billion. Kept the legal title so I could have privileged conversations, but about 90% of my work was on the business side, fundraising. I was the head of asset management. I was the chief operating officer, and I ran the business for about 9 years. Enjoyed it a lot. Personal reasons, family reasons, I left and rejoined the firm. Went from sort of litigation and real estate and creditors' rights to more finding debt and equity, fixing problems for people, restructuring some complicated assets, finding some stolen money at times, finding some tax breaks, just advising and helping move some troubled assets along, hopefully to a positive return. And I've just moved down from New York, as you know, and I've been home again. I was a Floridian till the early 90s. And I just came back. So we're here for about a month.
Excellent. Good. We're glad to have you here. Now, as we talk about these investments, clearly there are disputes that arise out of these investments. And the question that I would like to ask you and for you to address is, how are those disputes in the private equity hedge fund world different than the disputes in other sectors? What are the issues that you see, and how do you perceive that people handle those disputes differently?
I don't think the disputes themselves are all that different. I mean, if you have, we'll just take a distressed investment of some sort, or sponsor stealing money or keeping everything. The disputes are the same. It's the parties who are different. And so in the banking world or in the corporate world, where they're a little bit more conservative and they have shareholders and they're a little bit more concerned about headline risk, they tend to be more conservative. But in our world, we tend to be more aggressive. I mean, the old expression of time is money. Time is actually money when you're talking about private equity and hedge funds. I mean, we borrow the money from our investors, and there's a hurdle. 2 and 20 and 8 is usually this kind of the standard model. It's pushed down in recent years, but that's a different panel. And so you're borrowing money at 8%. And you're paying management fees, and that's going to be a drag. And so you have to then invest better, right? If you're investing, call it 93 cents of every dollar, if you think about fees and expenses, you have to get mid and high teens on an unlevered basis to get that back, and obviously pay the GP. So anytime you get delayed or processes, litigation, other things, time is money, and then your investment turns negative.
And when you say time is money, does that mean that you see parties are more inclined to settle cases, or they're more aggressive in their pursuit of their disputes? Which one?
Aggressive for sure, including myself when I was making those decisions. Although I'm obligated to counsel sometimes against that, I obviously counsel for it sometimes, depending on the jurisdiction you're in. So I was laughing in terms of the question. I was almost going to answer for Gabe when you had said real estate, tech, healthcare. I was going to say yes, just kind of everything. Just like I think it was Mitch who said, capital has no borders. I mean, we're generally location agnostic and we want to go find assets and we're looking for yield, right? And so where my assets tended to be on the coast because I stayed in and around population centers. I had stuff in Mississippi and Texas and elsewhere. And so the aggressiveness will be a factor depending on where you're at. And the rights and remedies that certain courts in different jurisdictions will give you, how borrower friendly or how lender friendly those judges may be, which at the end of the day, most judges these days are elected. They're sort of politicians. And they have a constituency, which is the general populace and not the hedge funds and the lawyers. And so all those things come to bear. But I would say aggressiveness is certainly a key factor when you're talking about the difference between hedge funds and private equity versus your more traditional bank lenders and corporates.
Rodrigo, I want to welcome you. I know you came all the way from Brazil to join us in this event. Very much appreciated. Ines Calderon wants you to be a member of MIAS soon, so give her your number. But tell us, I know you have had a lot of experience working in international arbitrations, dealing with private equity. How are international arbitrations arising out of private equity investments and hedge funds different and unique as opposed to others, other assets or other type of disputes?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm feeling very intimidated because I'm a lawyer and I lose many of my cases. And I'm afraid even about the storm that's coming tomorrow.
It'll be fine.
Well, that said, it is true that I've been working a lot with private equity law firms, with private equity disputes, sorry. And this is all public. I've been working for General Atlantic. I work against KKR. I work for Dragoneer, for Advance. I work against Carlyle. So I work for both sides. It's a kind of a song that I sing and I hear at the same time. So this gives me the opportunity to see this kind of disputes. I think they are different mostly because they are more sophisticated. So you need someone to rule on that understands about the business of private equity, because in state courts, for example, at least in Latin America, they are more used to judge foreclosed cases, simple cases, eviction cases. So it's a completely different animal for them when they have to take a look at that. So, and the disputes are not disputes that you usually see, like earn-out disputes, for example, which is very common. To finish introducing myself, I worked for the leading litigation law firm in Brazil for 25 years. And last year I opened my own law firm.
And in terms of these disputes, why is international arbitration a better method of dispute resolution? What are the advantages of international arbitration for private equity hedge funds disputes?
That's the part that I'm gonna displease everyone, because of course that if you are a private equity firm and you decide to invest in Brazil, for example, you don't wanna litigate in Brazil, all right? I don't want to litigate in Brazil. So because the local courts, they probably will favor the seller who has the company and sold the company to you. So if you're looking for impartiality and neutrality, of course that you should use arbitration in this case. But just to make the other point on that question, arbitration is under attack all over the world, and especially in Latin America, because arbitrators, they don't disclose their relationships with the parties, with the lawyers. So sometimes you choose an arbitration in order to avoid this kind of interference to the seller, and you end up in the same trap with the arbitrators. But that said, I still prefer arbitration, international arbitration anyway. Another advantage is expertise, right? as I said, it's difficult for a state judge to understand a lot of private equity. So you can choose someone from the market that can help you to take a look on that. But that's not also completely true, because if you're not gonna find someone very successfully in this market that is willing to serve as an arbitrator, right? It's difficult to find. You're not gonna find Martin Scobari or Francisco, willing to sit as an arbitration. They are probably doing something more profitable than that. So, and on the other hand, some state courts in Latin America, Brazil, Chile, they have specialized chambers of commercial arbitration that they are doing a pretty good job.
Joe, do you agree that in terms of arbitration, one of the key advantages of arbitration is to be able to select an arbitrator who knows private equity, who knows the issues that are unique and intrinsic to the world in which our clients are living?
I'm gonna object as a leading question, clearly, because
A very much leading question.
yeah, the first thing, well, so I will wrap into my answer, a comment I was gonna make is, which is, he touched on, you do get to pick, kind of your judge. If you think of an arbitrator as a private judge, you do get to pick somebody with subject matter expertise, which is really, really, really critically important. I've had, and as you were talking, I was thinking, I had a judge, thank God she was very, very, very smart, but she was new, federal bench. And you know how many times she said to me, talk to me like I'm a third grader, on the record in federal court hearings, injunction hearings over a call option and conversion from prep to common case. It was, I don't think it was that complicated, but she had never done it. That's not the world she came from, but she was now a federal judge for life. And again, thank God she was smart, and took a year, but we educated her and we won that. But that is I'd say a success story in front of a judge who is not experienced in that area. Oftentimes, and I mentioned before that judges are often politicians, certainly at the state court level. I mean, they ran for the bench, and they get 2 weeks of judge school, as they call it. They usually start in, family court or, surrogate court or somewhere, and then you kind of make the rounds in criminal court. And so oftentimes you get judges, and we're talking about now sometimes complicated private equity and hedge fund disputes between shareholders, between joint venture partners, investors, or just with with the sponsors on deals that you've invested in. And you are taking a risk, obviously. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is there are less options if I'm not happy with the arbitrator's decision, where I'm talking in the hypothetical where they clearly get it wrong. And I've had that. I've won a lengthy, expensive, very expensive at the time for the client, 8-day in-person arbitration during COVID. I made him come to me just to torture everybody. And there was a shall award fees, mandatory shall award fees, and shall award interest on any amounts that were awarded. I won every single claim that was brought against my client. I won every single contractual claim that I counterclaimed with. I got dollars, I got interest on those dollars, and I didn't get my fees. And he didn't address them at all. So I wrote a letter. He just said, no, not giving you fees. So I moved to confirm that portion, confirm the portion where I got my money and won, vacate the portion where I didn't get my fees. And the state court judge, who's thankfully now retired, said, he considered it and didn't give them to you. And I said, but that's the point. He's not allowed to consider anything. It's a shall. So I'd say if I had a complaint, it's the lack, the subject matter expertise is critically important. The speed of which they generally can get to some sort of resolution, but the finality where it's wrong, I don't love.
In other words, and you mentioned speed is money at the beginning of your presentation. And in terms of the speed, and obviously there's been a lot of discussion about international arbitration, but still, in large part, international arbitration or arbitration in general is faster. It's a faster method to get to a resolution than the judicial system, you'd say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I said, again, a huge factor for me is you get a whole menu of people. And then, of course, we have a big firm and you start emailing, and we know this person, and we know this person, and good and bad experiences. And so again, in a case where you get to pick your judge, that's tremendously beneficial. You add on the speed, very important. Again, it is because we all underwrite to the downside. It's the downside of not having an option if they get it wrong.
Okay. So you like the expertise, you want to focus on your arbitrators, you like the speed, but I want to turn it over to this side, and I'm not going to ask any leading questions. I'm just going to let you speak your mind. Mitch, Valerio, in your groups, what have you heard about international arbitration in terms of the viability of international arbitration as a method to resolve private equity hedge funds disputes?
I'm not a lawyer, so let's establish that. I don't even play one on TV. But I'll tell you, the shortest distance to solving the problem is usually the best route. So I think that has no border either. I do think that whatever the approach is, whether it is working with a judge or whether it's working with people that are informed that you might happen to know, you're kind of, have to figure this out with your counsel and determine exactly what the best course of action is for the fund, private equity hedge fund, whatever entity it might be. So I vote, take as less time as possible, but be smart about, which approach you take.
Valerio?
Well, obviously it'll depend a little bit on what the type of dispute is. I have gone through workouts in a variety of countries in the UK and Italy, in Spain. And, just to use Italy as an example, it's a country where they've got a set of laws for bankruptcy that make you really not want to use them. It is designed to make you resolve it amicably, well, maybe amicably, outside of court. They don't want you in court. And if you are foolish enough to go in there, they will make you pay with sweat and tears in addition to whatever money to, with a 17-year settlement plan or something like that. And it's not a great way to resolve an issue. So I think it really does depend. Are you arguing about an earn-out where you can kind of go into a room and fight over it? Or is this a liquidation of a company or a restructuring? But, in general, the view is that with arbitration, you kind of split the baby as opposed to getting an answer, and everybody wants to be right. So if you can't be right, then, do you want to go there? But again, it's a function of what's the background that you're looking at it in.
And I think what makes sense, it goes back to the point of you got to be careful selecting your arbitrator and selecting arbitrators that have a reputation for making decisions and understanding the issues.
Or the country you do business in.
Or the country you do business in. And how important is for arbitrators to have this expertise? In other words, expertise and knowledge of the private equity hedge fund world from your perspective.
Well, most non-disclosure agreements and fee agreements and sale and purchase agreements are under New York law or Delaware law because there's an impression that those judges have the greatest level of familiarity and sophistication to deal with those issues. You would not jurisdiction shop and say, well, I want to do this in North Carolina. Not that there's anything wrong with the judges there, but they just don't see those things as much. So just as you would treaty shop or jurisdiction shop in the United States, you would do the same thing. And if you're in a country, it's hard to argue to bring a court case in another country. So arbitration is often the only way you can do that.
So from your perspective, Gabe, is there a difference between international arbitration and domestic arbitration? In other words, is there a more prevalent preference for international arbitration as opposed to domestic arbitration?
My focal point, yes. I would say I'm not afraid of domestic arbitration, but whenever I'm involved in it or mentoring someone or counseling someone that's about to encounter it, I try to tell them just not to do it, right? Because I believe that in order to win, you have to know how to lose. And if you can reach a resolution before arbitration, I think it's just much simpler, right? Because it's just a lot of time, and energy involved in the process and the expense. But I do believe in an international transaction, it serves it's a great value, right? It's just the opposing view of it, right? Because you have a clash of cultures, we did an acquisition in Europe and it ended up almost an arbitration. And I realized, okay, you've got a culture issue here. Like they're not understanding what we're saying. We're not understanding what they're saying. So now if we end up in arbitration in Denmark or in Sweden, it's going to be the same problem. And what he said was just so spot on. I just recently did an asset acquisition in Rhode Island, and we paid $2.2 million for this asset, and the seller had bought it for $400,000, and it had existing tenant in it. Their lease had expired, so we gave them a notice of non-renewal, and then they wanted to stay. So we raised the rent $20,000, and I went before this judge. The judge didn't understand cap rates. So the judge says, Mr. Ruse, I'm going to warn you, you've given yourself a poison pill. You're offering them a $20,000 rent when they're paying $4,000. I'm looking at this judge like, are you really saying this? I had to educate this judge. So I chose to say, give me a stay. and let me go negotiate this and figure this out myself, because I knew I was gonna get slaughtered by this judge. Or spend 2 weeks educating them on cap rates and cost of capital. So I definitely believe that, arbitration on the international aspect, I would definitely prefer that route versus litigating in a foreign country.
And are you seeing agreements with mediation requirements, pre-arbitration mediation requirements? In other words, the idea that you sit down with the other side and try to mediate before you actually commence an arbitration? Are you seeing that, and would you favor those type of agreements?
I think that all depends on the parties involved. That's always my posture, is I will say, hey, let's have a private conversation. Like really try to, especially if you're going into a relationship, like I don't want to go into a relationship after, having a divorce court arbitration, because that's just really bad for business, right? So if it's the beginning of a relationship, I'll just, even if it takes us losing, I'd rather just lose, and bring the parties together and build something together bigger than just starting off on, on that sour note.
Valerie, what do you?
I mean, it's hard to put that in a document with any teeth. You can't have an agreement to come to an agreement before you go to arbitration or before you go to court. But, I think you can certainly convey that verbally and say, this is how we like to do things. And in some ways that can, in my world, it can help you win a transaction, because it's saying, listen, we understand that this, problems come up, but this is how we want to resolve it first. Don't serve me in the middle of the night with a subpoena. Let's talk it through. Let's make sure we come to these. Now, does that happen anyway in practice? Probably most of the time, to some degree. But if you've laid it out and you kind of said, look, this is what we think. Got a problem, bring two of your people and let's get together. Then you can kind of create the rules for that conversation a little better and frame it out. But at the end of the day,
Yeah, it's
you
also on
can't
context.
force it.
Yeah, if there's money missing, that's a different story, right? But if it's an interpretation of a contract
Yeah.
or an earnout, that's a different context as well, right?
No.
Well, so let me just add though,
Please.
you're not gonna, there's like a 0% chance at the beginning of a case that you're gonna be successful in a mediation, because tensions are high, and that's why you got to the point where you are. However, while mediation is rarely successful in my experience, I do find it to be a good use of small dollar resources and time, because oftentimes you get to now hear a third party, pick a mediator, it's maybe a retired judge or an arbitrator, and you have this third party's view of how, your arguments are landing, what is playing well. And frankly, maybe you have your own client who's difficult, or maybe the other side is a client who's difficult who, through the mediator, they can say tougher things that maybe the lawyer cannot. So I find that the process is helpful for a lot of strategic reasons, but I don't think there's a chance of it settling at the outset.
Rodrigo, what's been your experience with pre-arbitration mediation? Whether it is required by agreements or whether it is initiated by the parties voluntarily?
I'm very glad to hear from someone else that he doesn't believe in mediation. I have the same problem. I think that the parties, first of all, it's hard to find a well-trained mediator, and in the beginning of the litigation, it's hard for them to understand each other. So I agree that I rarely saw a case where a mediator could facilitate things, But I saw very complicated cases that we put the parties together to talk, and then they found a solution by their own. I totally agree. But if you say this nowadays in the arbitration community or mediation, you can get killed.
Now, I want to go back to the business side and ask you, Gabe and Valeria, to talk about your experience with arbitration counsel. And how can arbitration counsel improve the arbitration process for the business perspective? Not necessarily for the win or for the resolution of the case, but for the business of the private equity, of the hedge fund, of the investors that are looking at these issues and ultimately want to get to a resolution and continue with their business. What's been your experience in that area?
Love for you to start that one.
I'll say, so I don't want to be provocative or offend anyone, but one thing I learned along the way is obtaining counsel is I'll bid it out. I'll present the case and just get a flat fee. And I've noticed that in the long term for us, just it expedites things, it gets done quicker, it's more efficient. And I just learned that, over time and over just experience. That has favored me better. I'll go out and bid it out to 2 or 3 firms. This is the cases we're looking at. I need a flat fee to handle this, and it's just much more efficient. That's what I've learned.
Okay. And have you had any war stories that you want to share with us
In
terms of-
arbitration?
In arbitration?
Yeah,
or-
me, my partner's here somewhere, my ex-partner, I think he was Michael Drath. We were involved in arbitration, which is a nightmare. Yeah, I just, again, again, we didn't know, you know, the arbitrator, just the amount of documents they asked us from an employee standpoint in our business was just overwhelming. Some of it was insulting. But yeah, and I don't think that's, again, that's not, you know, one size fits all. That's right. You do have good arbitrators out there, just to experience, but yeah, we've had some bad stories of arbitration. We've had some good ones, right, as well, so.
Well, can you tell us about the good ones? We want to hear the good ones.
Forgot. Yeah, we had one internationally and it wasn't on an earn out and it was basically, you know, I think right, maybe even before arbitration, right up to it, we just resolved it. I think just, you know, going back to what he said, ego, right? You know, when you realize that you're operating from a place of ego, it's like, I want to win, you're not gonna win, you're gonna lose, right? But I think if you can check your ego, it's what I always tell other people, is just, you know, check it. Where are you at? Where are you coming from this transaction? Like, you know, is it really just about winning? Like, you know, if it is, and you're gonna lose, you know, it's just at some point you have to get it. But if we can just, you know, concede something, right? Again, it's usually monetary. I think it's just, you know, everybody goes home and just much more peaceful. You know, we've had personal litigation that we've been involved in, you know, my wife with other parties. And you know, I've left the house and my wife says, just fix this now. Like, I want this over today. Right. And she's actually told me those exact words. Like, got it. You know, and I go in there, it's like, give them whatever they want. Like, you know, so yeah, it's.
Well, Lady, from your perspective, how can arbitration counsel improve the process to the business parties?
I think it's probably more of a psychological side to it. And you know, you remind me of a phrase one of my bosses once said, never trade with your ego, which is actually a hedge fund thing, but
Yeah, it is.
don't trade with your ego because you are going to get thrown against the wall and you're going to look like a cartoon character sliding down. You've got to put the ego aside. So what am I really trying to achieve here that is going to move my business forward? I'm finding now that, you know, starting up a private equity investor it's a lot of work. And every time I'm not spending analyzing a new transaction or working towards a new transaction is, as we were said collectively, it's money. Time is money. So to me, the number one goal is always to minimize time. Figure out what your minimum is, figure out how you're going to try and get that minimum, and then just realize you may not. just push through. I mean, it's kind of like being a lineman in football. You got to try and go through that, you know, hold that line as best you can, but at some point you're gonna have to let go sometimes too.
Ego, Mitch, you look.
No, I would just add to that, you know, in business and in life, finding the right experts to help you guide the ship is never a bad idea. And to your point on ego, I think that you know, many people, separate from me being president of the Hedge Fund Association, I run a PR firm. You might have never heard of it because I work on crisis PR. So I've helped keep a lot of people out of trouble and out of the New York Post for poor life choices. And some of that is as simple as getting an Uber instead of driving in the Hamptons. I mean, there are things that one should do in business, whether it's, you know, being a hedge fund manager or private equity manager, where having good counsel, good attorneys guiding you as to what the local issues are that you need to be aware of, what was the agreement, and informing your decision making, that is never a bad idea.
Yo, Rodrigo, how do you navigate this world in light of these concerns? The concern that, yes, obviously, there's always a need to win, and you commence an arbitration to win, but at the same time, our clients want to get the deal done. So there's a perspective there. How, as arbitration counsel or dispute counsel, you navigate that world and try to address that concern while at the same time pushing forward the arbitration?
First, I was gonna say, not only not trade with your ego, but don't fall in love with assets is another variant, which is, and don't think you have to police the world, right? Which is punish everybody who's done you wrong. But I think really critically for me is, what do you define a win as? I define a win as making money and checking that ego and letting them think they got something from me when I got the greater, you know, piece of this, and they feel good and they had an ego and they, you know, apologize. Probably, I don't care. If I made money and my investors made money, that was a win. And so I think what's really important is define what a win is for you. And that is not necessarily, you know, pulverizing and crushing somebody and feeling good about that and spending $1 million to pick up $100,000, you know, just to call that picking up pennies in front of a bulldozer, you know. So I think finding the right definition for the win is the most important. And then, you know, listen, again, ultimately though, especially on this, back on this side of the practice now, which is representing those clients instead of being one, is you have to counsel your client, but they ultimately make the decisions. And if they want to keep spending because it will make them sleep better at night and they are okay with that, then you just keep going and you try to pulverize that person.
And I think that's so important and definitely more important than in other disputes. That at the inception of the arbitration, at the inception of the dispute proceeding, you define what winning looks like. What is the objective of this arbitration? Because what may be a win in an ultimate award at the end of the proceedings may not be a win for the business side because of the time it takes, because of the expenditure investment it requires. So defining winning, and winning may not be winning the arbitration, humiliating the other side and proving that the other side is wrong. Winning may be as simple as getting a resolution that we can live with so that we can move on. What do you say to that, Rodrigo?
But defining and redefining, not just at the beginning. I mean, facts change, evidence changes. Arbitrator's not, the panel is not going, I just recently dropped from a panel of 3, expensive, but also I knew I had one and I knew another one was on the other, against me. And one was just kind of quiet. And so that's who our audience was. But the chairperson was clearly on our side. And so we just said, this is really expensive to have 3. And the other side said, yeah, you're right, it's really expensive. So we dropped the 2 and the chairman stayed on. But I just said that redefining as time goes on, what is a victory is, I think,
Yeah,
important.
sometimes a win could be just getting out of arbitration.
Yeah.
We had a case in Brazil, and I've done business in Brazil for 20 years. It's a challenging environment to do business, and the arbitration was in Brazil. So I just wanted to get out of it. It's like, I don't want to be dragged into this arbitration because I know it's just a lengthy, costly process. And that to me was defined as a win. It's just finish it, settle this.
I'm sorry, and I just jumped in front of you to make a point, so.
No, go ahead.
First of all, we're talking about ego before. What I see a lot, it's the client ego and the lawyer's ego is even bigger, right? People say in Brazil that when a lawyer wants to commit suicide, he climbs his own ego and then he jumps. Well, and for me to define victory, winning in an arbitration is to take your client out of that mess as soon as possible because time is money for him. And the only way that I do, it's the way that I believe, and sometimes the clients find some difficulty in understanding that, is to be more aggressive as you can, because it depends, and it takes time for the parties to understand that this will not take them anywhere. Most of the times, not the private equity firms, but the party who build that business and etc. So it's very attached. So as soon as they understand what kind of problem they're gonna face along the way, it's better. So being aggressive I think it's the best way to find a deal, not litigate for litigating. This is not gonna take anyone anywhere.
Now, I want to see some of this winning, defining winning and redefining winning as well. How do you incentivize that and maintain that communication with your clients, who a lot of times are very smart people, but they're not necessarily lawyers per se? So how do you maintain that communication throughout the arbitration so that the conversation that you had at the inception where winning was defined with specific parameters may have changed either because of a resolution that the arbitrators have issued or because of some development in the factual situation in the case?
Well, first of all, don't let the client define what winning is for you at the beginning of your case. That's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, I think you need to counsel them and say, yeah, we understand the goals. We understand what we're playing for here. And, you tell them the pros and cons, you tell them where their case is strong and where there may be some trouble convincing the arbitrator or a judge if you're in court. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think keeping them involved all on the way, particularly even if they're not lawyers. I mean, they're sophisticated people who understand risk, and whether you're a business person, trader in a fund or a PE shop, you are assessing risk and you're making a decision, you're making a trade at the end of the day. And that's what litigation, that's what arbitrations are. It's a trade at the, and it's the same sort of analysis. But I think that the other side of that is sometimes your clients think that you could be weak if you're counseling. And so you gotta resist the urge to say, yeah, let's just keep going, right? And be the lawyer who's more aggressive than your client. Now, one last piece of that would be keeping them informed, obviously keeping them involved. You can't make decisions without them anyway. It's advising if they consent. But I think that it's important that, as I said, as you're keeping them informed along the way, that you're letting them know where their weaknesses are. Like I said, we're always reassessing that. And if you have an opportunity to say, hey, listen, this is a good chance that we could maybe get out of this for X, take the money back. But then again, ultimately you just keep going. So when I was a client, I had lawyers, oh, I'm not gonna do this. I said, yes, we are, and here's why. But it was much more strategic. I mean, you had an educated and funded, client and who knew the area very well. Some of these were very large positions. And I said, yeah, it's about 50 grand in fees. I don't care. I said, it's a $60 million deal. I said, first of all, I think I'm better than lottery chances, Powerball. I said, I'm better than 50-50. I said, think about that. I spent 50 grand. I get the $62 million case over like that. And in that particular example, they have to rule in the motion. I filed it and the debtor called me. He goes, what are you doing? So I'm suing you. He goes, what do you want? I said, I want all the, few $1 million that he had carried away. And so we're going to change these documents and you're going to do this and that. And I said, we're going to do a memo to the deal room that basically says I win and you lose. And so you can't mess with my buyers. And he went, okay. So, again, it's such a chess game, I'd say, whether you're in arbitration or in litigation, dealing with the facts and the law, dealing with your clients, and just being on top of that all the time.
I want to switch to turn to this side now and talk about that definition of winning and that communication that you want to have with your attorneys and how involved you want to be in terms of the definition of winning and explaining to your attorneys the objectives of the arbitration beyond the legal objective of winning a case or winning an award.
Yeah, I guess again, it's again very personal. In recent litigation, I tried something really unconventional. I told my attorney, no, I want to talk to the plaintiff directly. He said, you're out of your mind. I said, no, I want a private meeting with him. And that's what settled the case. And my attorney said, I've never seen that done. So I think, to each person, and that was, to me, winning was, being able to talk to him, all right, and, really maybe bridge a gap to a future relationship of what could be. And that was, I gave a little, he gave a little. We went to lunch, came back, and I think we both won, right? But again, that's again very unconventional. But yeah, sometimes you want to agree with your attorney. Your attorney say, no, you're going to win, you're going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, there's what I think of as winning personally and what I would think of winning in the case. For me, I view my responsibility to people who are employed by me very seriously. So to me, whatever I can do to keep them employed, I actually care about. But when it comes to winning a case, then it's really just going to be determined by what I think, where I think my damage was, or where was my loss, and how can I mitigate or eliminate that as much as possible. And I personally value perspective. So that's what I'm looking for, is that kind of comment. If you spend $50,000 and you can win $60 million case, well, yeah, sure. That's what I want to know. I don't find often that legal professionals can give me that clarity. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it delivered to me in that way. It's kind of like, well, you might win, but who can tell you? And that's not confidence building if you're the one. But it also depends if you are the plaintiff or you're the defendant. And so, to me, it's just, to me, it's about immunizing as much as possible. Because honestly, I don't really care. This is business. It's not personal. It's not, they're not going to keep Valerio Forte out of some society or Hall of Fame or pantheon of whatever. We're just people here working. So at the end of the day, I don't really care. I mean, I'm not going to see, chances are if we're suing each other, I may never even see them again. So how much do I care? Are they going to call up my kids and tell them I'm a bad guy? I mean, I'm just not worried about it.
Now, I think Joe mentioned something that is very common, and there are some attorneys that feel that are concerned that a recommendation for settlement or mediation could be perceived as a lack of confidence on the part of the attorney in the case or a weakness. Do you ever have that reaction that you feel that an attorney that comes to you and recommends that the settlement is probably the best course of action, and that you have an adverse reaction to that?
Sure, but I would ask them to justify why they think that's the case. And if that same attorney brought me the same conclusion all the time, then I would be really suspect. The first time I'll wonder, second time I'll really wonder, and then probably won't go to them the third time.
So you want to settle, but if an attorney recommends settlement, they better be prepared to justify the
Explain
decision.
why it's worse than actually following through. But But I would make any decision on that basis.
I do have a couple more questions, but before I do, I'm very conscious of timing. I want to open it up for questions from the audience to the extent we have any. Yes.
About you guys being very focused on results. I like very much what you said earlier, which is really about, trying to get almost like an ROI for the litigation. You're right, a lot of lawyers don't want to do it that way. But in light of that, and also in light of the timing, the speed you all wanted, have any of you dealt with, also for lawyers, with modifying the rules of international arbitration to make it quicker, either doing a fast track of published rules or making some sort of other modifications to move the process quicker, given what you guys are trying to deal with?
I have not.
I've not.
Is that an option that would make arbitration more attractive to you? If
Being able to change the rules?
to change the rules to expedite
Sign me
the
up.
proceeding.
Applies to everything.
There are fast track rules
Right.
available to you, but the problem is the parties have to agree to it. There are rules out there. The question, I haven't seen the private equity sector where they've taken advantage of those, and those really are meant for cases where, I mean, a lot of them are structured for smaller size cases. But even in large cases, you could do it. It's a scary predicament for lawyers that you're making a job a lot quicker and a lot more efficient, but it is out there.
I mean, I worked for a PE fund that was allergic to arbitration. So to tell me there was a fast track option and we could have perhaps even put that in our agreements to start with, they wouldn't have done it because they would not have put in arbitration. We've been on occasion required to accept it from another party. And maybe there we should have, maybe that would have been a good idea. I don't know. I'm certainly open to it now.
No, and from the perspective of the attorneys, I think a lot of times the fast track option is very attractive because it advances the need for speed, but it's very concerning to the attorneys because with speed, obviously comes a resolution that may be incomplete or not fully developed as well. So Dan is absolutely right. That when we are faced with those type of fast track options, you want to step back and analyze it for the case and see if it's proper for the case. Any comments, any reaction from my lawyers here with respect to fast track option?
I don't like fast track option.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm here to disagree, but I'll tell you why. People get allergic to arbitration, then they go to court, and they get more allergic to court. Because, for example, in Brazil, it takes 9 years to have a case ruled, and arbitration is going to take 3. And I think that time is of the essence for the private equity business. The problem of short track is that if the arbitrators, if they give crazy decisions after 3 or 4 years, you can't imagine what they can do in 45 days, okay? So they give decisions that you don't believe. You will not be able to appeal from that. So the worst decisions that I have seen in my life, and believe me, you think that, I just want to finish that first, losing or winning. But they make you lose in a way that first gets you frustrated because you don't understand the reason, and this is really frustrating. And sometimes they give results that not only you or your lawyer could even imagine. So fast track arbitration is only if it's a very simple case, not a complicated one, then it works
And
well.
that's when we've seen it successfully used for the simpler cases that can be presented to the arbitrators in writing, for example, without the need for a hearing, for the need of expanded discovery. Fast track may be an option for those type of cases. For the more complex cases is very concerning as well. So yeah.
5 year at the perspective of an arbitration, your discussion is thinking of it as a cost, right, as a problem that you have to deal with. But have you ever looked at potential disputes as assets that are part of what makes an M&A deal attractive? Maybe a big claim that, the current owner of the asset is not interested in pursuing for whatever reason, but, makes sense within, from your perspective, and of course, think of it as a, profit opportunity. Have you ever thought about them like that?
Well, I mean, I have not personally, but the organizations I've worked at have, and sometimes that's within distressed companies, sometimes it's not. But we've definitely looked at outstanding litigation as potentially an asset, where we thought there was we would bring in counsel to say, what do you think about this? We'd talk with the target's counsel, and we would, excuse me, take a view, very much so. We did it at HIG in a significant way, I think probably only 2 or 3 times in 15 years, but it happened.
And those are issues in which, for example, we know of a number of private equities that are investing in third-party funding, in the third-party funding industry, that are funding those type of investment in arbitrations or commercial arbitrations.
You
in
mean
general.
advancing against?
Advancing against that
That, I
receivable
wasn't
that
even
you have.
thinking about that, but yes,
Mhm.
that too.
Mhm.
That's a whole industry.
Litigation funding, absolutely. It's a growing industry.
For sure. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
We're all very positive on Florida and so am I, but let me ask you, do you have any idea what the homeowner property insurance crisis is gonna do? Are you familiar with that? Because the rates are going up all over.
Yep.
Maybe-
My rate's tripled. I think like me, many people are just gonna self-insure.
Yeah, I'm hoping the state, which has apparently a record surplus this year, will frigging figure it out. But I don't think that's actually the biggest risk in the state, to reversing the momentum. It's not a good one. It's definitely an issue, but I think there are other issues that are more substantial, like do we have target universities down here to attract employers? We have often focused a lot on hedge funds, which is great, bringing hedge funds down to Florida, but those are 20, 30, 50 person companies, or construction. And construction is transitory. So I think there are bigger issues around the economy we're building down here, and how all these people who are moving to Florida are actually going to be able to drive somewhere near Brickell.
I mean, they're not taking the train?
Yeah.
I-95 is going to be extended to Brickell, I hear.
I commuted from Weston to Brickell for 15 years, and you know, it got longer. It didn't get much longer. It went from about 55 minutes to an hour and 5 with no traffic. But the worst of it is always the last 3 miles. It's not. I could have driven to Medley. Then I would be going down the turnpike and or the Palmetto.
The train.
Yeah, but just to get there is worse. But it's always the last 3 miles. It's always, you know, from about 62nd Street Northwest to, I don't know what it is in the south, it's probably immediately to the south, but they've got to solve those issues, because we talk about how nice it is to live here, but it's not so nice when I've read a lot of audiobooks. A lot.
No, but that brings me to a point, and we all love audiobooks, I think. But in terms of this growth that we're seeing in private equity, international arbitration, what could stop this growth? And please do not mention hurricanes, because obviously we're dealing with one right now. But what could stop this growth that we're seeing in the international arbitration, in the private equity hedge fund growth industry in Miami and in Florida as a whole?
Well, I think one of the issues is being able to attract, I mean, it's great for a partner from Citadel to move down here and drop 10 or $15 million on a house. He can make that choice. But starting employees, et cetera, they can't make those distinctions. And too many people think Miami is Brickell and downtown and Miami Beach. You'd never
think
find.
it's Miami Beach.
Right, you won't find a business school grad thinking, oh, I'll be an urban pioneer and move to Hialeah. They're not gonna do that. They don't, or Homestead. They don't know that that's an option, or Overtown or something like
Kendall.
that. So, but do they even know those places
No, they
exist?
don't know they
And,
exist.
and the thing is,
They picture that 10 blocks of Ocean Drive.
Yeah.
That's what they picture when they come here.
or between 1450 Brickell and Sugar. That's about it. And people have got to start thinking about Miami as more than just 5 streets, 5 avenues, because it can't just all be supported in that narrow range.
Parting thoughts. What would you tell the international arbitration practitioners that are in the audience based on your experience with private equity and hedge funds, particularly those practitioners who want to expand their relationships with private equity funds and hedge funds group?
Well, you want me to
Yes,
help our competitors expand? their
exactly.
relationships?
That's what MIAS is all about, right?
No, again, I think that it's, I want this to come off wrong. You can't tell a lawyer not to think like a lawyer. I would say you really need to learn the client's business better. You need to understand what makes them tick. You could be a great lawyer. You could file pleadings and strategize on the risk of case law and outcomes. Hopefully they're making a more definitive decision than maybe you could win, maybe you could lose. I don't like the CYA emails either. I reply and say, I don't read past the first two sentences. So if you've tried to CYA, you haven't covered anything because I'm not reading it. So, and I'm not paying for that either. But no, I think that it's really, really, really important that you dig into your client's business, understand what makes them tick. Don't step over the line and offer them business advice unless they ask you for it. I had a bankruptcy lawyer, not at Reed Smith, because Reed Smith was conflicted out when I was a client on this particular deal. Got to this point where I was taking all the upside. I was taking all the equity upside because the guy was a jerk and he deserved it. And at some point, my lawyer came to me and said, hey, they offered X, you should take it. It'd be a really good return for your fund. I said, thank you, Michael. And I called my client relationship partner I knew very well. And I said, if any lawyer at your firm ever tells me what a good return for my fund is again, you don't know the rest of the stuff in my portfolio, like that's the last time we're working together, And so again, it's a balancing act of not stepping over a line, understand the client's business, but not trying to interfere with that business. Hopefully weaving some of that advice maybe into why extending that out and not doing a deal, settling, especially when you are way getting paid above your total claim at that point. It all comes back to understanding your clients and understanding their business, and then trying to match the strategy, what I call the human chess game of arbitration or litigation, with with their goals.
Rodrigo?
Well, I was thinking, and to be honest, I don't know how I end up here because we don't plan everything in our lives, right? And I started working on the private equity business like 15, 20 years. And then what I try to do, and I think that the clients like a lot, and it's genuinely you put yourself on your client's place, not not only as a lawyer, but first trying to understand his or her business. No one knows better what's going on in terms of facts and etc. and needs than your client. So you need to hear him very, very carefully, and then think for a while, like that you are on his shoes actually, and what you would like to do, and what would be better for him. Looking into all these aspects, imagine like if I were you, what I would feel like right now. Try to accommodate the anxiety in the beginning and etc. Try to talk and walk all the way together with your client. Sometimes you win, but if you're not together with your client, he doesn't realize that. And sometimes you lose and he still thinks that you did a wonderful job because he sees that you did all the best you could.
No, thank you. And now I want to turn to my private equity hedge funds friends to talk to the private equity hedge funds people in the audience that are dealing with international arbitration lawyers. What would be your advice to them from a business perspective in their dealings and interactions with attorneys?
My advice would be cautious, of course. Check your objective before you embark on it. Check the local culture, local legislation. Like again, going back to Brazil, it can turn out to be a very lengthy process. And I'm always about cutting my losses before I go into it.
I would amplify everything, especially the cultural issue. When I worked in Europe, you end up in something in Finland and you're negotiating with Finns, or you're negotiating with Spaniards, or you're negotiating with French. They're all different. So make sure whatever counsel you have can be sensitive or at least aware of how that other culture responds. You don't want to be blunt with people who are not blunt. You don't, or whatever you want to be, at least do it intentionally. I guess that's what I would say. Don't pick the wrong people by mistake. at least pick them on purpose, that can empathize with people on the other side of the desk.
Mitch?
Doing business with lawyers, I do that quite often. Thankfully, it's not about me, but my association, we've got 5 lawyers on a board of directors for the reason of making sure that we are interacting, and I'm understanding as a spokesman for the organization, as a lobbyist, what my rules of the road are. What are the implications of the things that I might discuss over lunch, a meeting, a drink? So I think the relationships between anybody on the arbitration side and anybody on the fund management side, you've got to find that rhythm together, just like any relationship in any business. You got to find a way to get along, but also to understand what each party is responsible for accomplishing for the other.
I want to thank each one of you for your contribution to these panels. Please join me in congratulating you for a very good presentation and for sharing your insightful experience with us. And I think that does it for us. Thanks for coming. I very much appreciate it. And please make sure to attend the other MIAS events and look at the flyers, become a sponsor of the Miami International Arbitration Week. Don appreciates that, I'm sure.
Francisco, thank
By the
you.
way, there's lunch. There's lunch in the back for those of you who did not have lunch before you join us, and you're free to stick around for as long as you want to.